I don't know how to explain what that church meant to me. It was just an old abandoned building that the whole city had forgotten, wooden benches covered in dust, windows that hadn't been cleaned in years, a silence so complete it felt like the world outside didn't exist. No congregation, no pastor, no choir, just stillness. But it was mine. Every time life got too heavy, my feet found their way there without me having to think about it. That evening was no different. I sat in the middle row with my parents' photographs on my lap and a small bottle of alcohol in my hand that I hadn't opened. I hadn't brought it to drink. I had brought it the way you bring something familiar when you need to feel less alone. I had been crying, not the loud kind. The quiet kind that happens when you've done it so many times your body stops making noise and just lets the tears go the way it lets breath go. Automatically, like it has accepted that this is simply what life is now. I looked at my mother's face in the photograph and traced it with my thumb. How did everything go so wrong, I thought? How did I end up here? I closed my eyes and let the cold air of the building settle over me, and for one moment I allowed myself to feel nothing. No fear, no pain, no memory of what had happened earlier that evening at that house. Just silence. Then I heard footsteps. My eyes opened. The sound was coming from outside, fast and urgent, like someone moving quickly but trying not to be heard. Every nerve in my body switched on at once. I slipped off the bench immediately, crouched into the narrow aisle on the right side of the middle row, and pressed myself flat against the wood, pulling my parents' photographs tight against my chest. The old church door groaned open. Someone came inside. I tilted my head carefully and peered from the right side of the bench toward the entrance. The church had 3 rows of benches with aisles running between them. I could see the left aisle clearly. I could see the right aisle. But the middle row of benches blocked my view of anything moving between them. The footsteps stopped. I couldn't see anyone. I began pulling myself back deeper into my hiding position, and at that exact moment, something solid and warm pressed against me from the other side of the bench. A body, right there, right beside me. The scream left my throat before I could do anything about it. Sharp and loud and completely out of my control, shattering every bit of silence the building had been holding. And in the dead stillness of that abandoned church, it rang out like a thunderclap. Outside, the boots that had been retreating stopped, then turned back toward the church. The man beside me moved instantly. One arm came around me from behind and pulled me hard against his chest, and his hand came down firmly over my mouth before I could make another sound. I fought him immediately, twisting and pushing and pulling at his arm with everything I had, but his grip didn't shift even slightly. "Let me go," my mind screamed. "Let me go, let me go, let me go." He didn't. He held me with a controlled stillness that told me this was not a man who panicked. His breathing was slow and measured against the back of my neck. And then I felt something cold shift beside me. A gun. He was raising it. Ready. Oh God, I thought, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard I was certain the people searching outside could hear it. What have I walked into tonight? The church doors opened. Heavy boots entered. 3 pairs at least. They moved through the building slowly, sweeping the aisles, their voices low and clipped. Getting closer. I stopped breathing entirely. Then from somewhere deep in the back corner of the church, a bird shifted on the rafters and knocked a thin metal rod off the wall. It hit the floor with a sharp crashing sound that rang through the entire building. The boots pivoted, moved toward the back corner. The man behind me stayed completely still. I could feel every calculation he was making, his body tense and patient, reading the room, waiting. Only when the guards had moved far enough did he slowly exhale against my neck. And that was when I saw it. Even in the dim light, I could see the dark stains spreading through his shirt along his right side. Slow, persistent, the kind that doesn't stop on its own. He's been shot. Something shifted inside me the moment I understood that. Every fear I was feeling stepped back, and something stronger pushed forward. Something trained. Something that lived in me deeper than fear ever could. I carefully moved his hand from my mouth. He tensed immediately, and the gun shifted toward me, but I kept my movements calm and held his gaze in the darkness. "If you don't let me treat that wound right now, I whispered. "You're going to bleed out on this floor. And then it won't matter whether those men find you or not." He stared at me. I could feel the full weight of it, sharp and dangerous and assessing. I didn't look away. I held his eyes and waited. After a long moment, he lowered the gun. I got to work. I unwrapped my scarf from around my neck and pressed it firmly against his wound. I uncapped the alcohol bottle I had brought with me tonight and used it to clean the surface. He made a sound low in his throat, a tight, controlled exhale of pain that he swallowed back almost immediately. I noted that. Not his first time, I thought. Getting shot or being treated for it. Probably both. I bound the scarf around the wound as firmly as I could and worked with the quiet focus that my training had built into my hands over years of practice. Then the footsteps returned. One pair this time. Slow and deliberate, moving along the right aisle, coming directly toward us. His hand covered my mouth again instantly. But everything from that evening was pressing down on me at once. The house, what had almost happened, the betrayal, running through the streets, the gun, the blood, all of it sitting on my chest at the same time, and I made a small sound against his palm. Barely anything, just a faint catch of breath. But in that silence it was enough. The footsteps slowed. He looked at me. I looked at him. And in that fraction of a second, with no time left and no other option between us, he closed the distance. His lips found mine. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't romantic. It was urgent and decided in half a heartbeat with no room for anything else. His hand held my face and my entire world went silent. Every single thought I had just stopped. Just like that. Gone. There was nothing in that moment except the warmth of his mouth against mine and the cold floor beneath my knees and the complete and total impossibility of what was happening to me. From outside the church, one of the other guards called out sharply. The footsteps paused, hesitated, then retreated. The doors groaned open one final time and closed again, and the silence that followed was different. Real. The kind that meant they were actually gone. He pulled back. I sat completely still for one full second. Then something sharp and hot moved through my chest, fury and shock and embarrassment, and something else I refused to look at, and I pushed away from him. Hard. Pathetic, I said between my teeth. I grabbed what was still in my hands and walked straight out of that church without looking back. My steps were fast and unsteady, and my heart was pounding so loudly I was certain he could hear every beat of it in the silence I left behind. I didn't look back. I didn't see him pick up the scarf I left behind. I didn't see him find the ID card that had slipped from my things without me noticing. I didn't see the way he held it up in the dim light and read the name printed on it. Nurse Amara. Now let me take you back, because you can't understand how I ended up in that church that night without knowing how I got to Seoul in the first place. And that story starts somewhere that feels very far away from where it ended up. Welcome to Black Lotus, your new home for Mafia love stories, dark romance, and crime thrillers that will keep you up at night. If you love tension, dangerous men, and love stories that have absolutely no business being as compelling as they are, then trust me, you just found the right channel. Like this video, subscribe, and stay with us, because this one is only getting started. I am Nigerian. My father was a biomedical engineer, brilliant and deeply passionate about his work, and when a prestigious research institution in Seoul offered him a senior position, my mother looked at him across the dining table and said simply, "Wherever you go, we go." That was who my mother was. She never made big moments complicated. So we moved to Seoul. I was 11 years old. I grew up between two worlds. A Nigerian girl who learned to speak Korean without an accent, who topped her class every semester, who decided at 14, after watching a nurse work a hospital corridor with such calm and focused purpose, that this was exactly what I wanted to do with my life. We were doing well. My father thrived at the institution and earned deep respect among his colleagues. My mother adapted her catering business and built a loyal clientele, blending Nigerian flavors with the local market. We were comfortable and stable and happy, and to me that counted for everything. Then my parents were invited to attend a gala ceremony, a prestigious annual event where my father was being recognized for his contributions to his research team. They dressed up, My mother called me 3 times that evening to describe her new dress. They went. They never came home. A vehicle lost control on a wet stretch of road. Both of them, gone, together, the way they had always done everything. I remember the hospital. I remember a nurse handing me a paper cup of water I didn't drink. I remember thinking I needed to call my father to tell him what had happened, and then remembering I couldn't, that I never would again. I remember that thought arriving several times before it finally stayed. In Seoul, with no extended family, no aunties or cousins or community to fold around me the way it would have back in Nigeria, I was sent to live with my parents' 2 trusted Korean friends, Mr. and Mrs. Park, who had known my family since our first years in the city. They were not cruel in obvious ways. They housed me, fed me, made sure I attended school. But they were cold in ways that settled into you over time, ways you don't fully measure until you step back and look at the full weight of them. Every achievement I brought home was met with an instruction to do better next time. My grief was treated like an inconvenience that had already gone on long enough. I was never once celebrated, never once made to feel like I was anything more than an obligation they were fulfilling out of loyalty to a dead man. I learned not to need too much from them. I poured everything into my work instead. I graduated at the top of my nursing class. I built my career out of discipline and quiet determination, and I was proud of it even when nobody else seemed to notice. But the house I came home to every evening was never a home. It was just a place where I kept my things and waited for my life to become something. And then came the evening that changed everything. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Mr. Park came in behind me. Something in the air shifted immediately, dense and wrong in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck rise before I could explain why. When he moved toward me, I turned around and I saw his face, and I understood in an instant what was happening. I didn't think. My knee connected hard and clean, and he doubled over and I ran. Straight to the dining room where Mrs. Park was sitting, words pouring out of me breathless and shaking. Everything, all of it, looking at her face the entire time and waiting for the response a woman gives another woman when the worst thing has just nearly happened. What I saw instead broke something open in me that I didn't know could break. She looked at me steadily and said I was overreacting, that he was just being playful, that I was old enough to understand these things. I stood there and looked at this woman who had eaten my mother's food and laughed at my father's jokes and held my hand at both of their funerals, and I understood in one cold and complete moment that I had never been safe here. Not once. Not for a single day. I walked to my room. His banging on the door started almost immediately, but I had already stopped listening. I moved fast, grabbing my phone, my parents' photographs, the alcohol I had been saving for a night when the sadness became truly too heavy. I went out through the window. My feet carried me through the streets without needing to be directed. They always knew the way to the church. And that is how I ended up there that night. That is how I ended up on that cold floor in the dark, hiding from men with guns, pressing my scarf against the wound of a man I had never met in my life. That is how everything started. Now, while I was walking away from that church with my heart still pounding and my mind refusing to process anything properly, this is what was happening behind me. Kang Minjae sat with his back against the bench, the gun resting beside his right hand, and looked at the ID card he was holding between 2 fingers. Nurse Amara. He had met a lot of people in the world he moved through. People with power and people who wanted it. People who fought for their lives, and people who threw other lives away without a second thought. He had held a gun to more faces than he could count. He had never had someone look down the barrel of his gun and simply continue doing what they believed was right. He called his second in command. "Find her," he said. "Nurse at Seoul General. Her name is Amara. I want her shift schedule and her address." By morning, he tucked the scarf and the ID card into his jacket pocket, stood against the pull of pain from his side, and waited for his men to arrive. The next morning, I arrived at the hospital, exchanged greetings at the nurse's station, reviewed the handover notes, and was preparing for my first round when my colleague pulled me aside. "New patient in the private wing. Room 12. Gunshot wound, right side abdomen. Stable, but needs regular wound checks." He requested a dedicated nurse. I picked up the file and walked down the corridor. I pushed open the door to room 12, my eyes already moving to the chart at the end of the bed the way they always do. Then I looked up. I stopped walking. He was lying against a raised hospital bed with the particular stillness of a man who never fully lets his guard down even when he's supposed to be resting. His eyes were open, and they found me the moment I walked in, immediate and completely unsurprised. He looked at me the way someone looks at something they were already expecting. I stood there for 3 full seconds, just looking back at him. Then I walked to his bedside, leaned down until my face was level with his, and kept my voice very low and very controlled. Let me give you a warning. If you don't leave this hospital in the next 5 minutes, I will call the police. And you will have a very interesting time explaining to them how you ended up with a gunshot wound and a loaded firearm in an abandoned church in the middle of the night. He looked at me with the expression of a man who was genuinely enjoying himself. If you actually wanted to report me, he said, you would have done it last night. I stared at him. Then I let out a short breath of complete disbelief and straightened up. Wait, so you still have the audacity to talk? You stalk me to my place of work, sit there with that face, and... Stalk, he repeated, like he was testing the word and finding it somewhat inaccurate. Yes, stalk. That is exactly what this is. I stepped closer and dropped my voice. I was being nice when I helped you last night. I had every reason to leave you on that floor, and I chose not to because it is not in my nature to watch someone bleed to death regardless of how questionable their life choices are. Do not mistake that kindness for anything else. I paused. You should be dead right now if not for me. And this is how you repay it. Are you scared of me? He asked. I looked at him with an expression I couldn't fully control. Then I put one hand on the bed rail, bent down until the distance between our faces was a matter of inches, and said very quietly and very clearly, I am not scared of you. I am not scared of your gun, which I am quite certain you don't currently have on you. I once burst the tires on my school principal's car because he gave me an unfair punishment. I once smeared raw eggs across my teacher's car window because she gave too much homework on a Friday. I have been told I am disproportionate in my responses, and I have chosen to take that as a compliment. I held his gaze without blinking. So no, I am not scared of you. He held my gaze through the entire speech with the expression of a man doing his absolute best to look appropriately concerned and failing completely because something behind his eyes was doing the total opposite. Then he shifted forward slowly on the bed, closing the space between us until I could feel the warmth of his breath, and said very quietly, Are you sure? Something moved through my chest before I could stop it. A warmth that arrived without asking permission. And immediately behind it came the memory of the church, his mouth against mine, the silence that had swallowed the whole world in that half second, and the memory moved through me and left its fingerprints all over my composure before I could do anything about it. No, I told myself firmly. Absolutely not. You are a nurse. He is a patient. He is also, by all available evidence, a criminal. These are facts. Focus on the facts. I was still pulling myself together when the door opened. The man who walked in was in his early 50s, silver-haired, dressed in a suit that announced authority before his title did. In 4 years of working at this hospital, I had seen Director Choi Hyun-woo in person exactly twice, both times from a considerable distance. For someone at my level, being in the same room as him felt like something that happened to other people. He walked into room 12 smiling. Mr. Kang, he said, extending his hand with a respectful bow of his head. On behalf of the hospital, I want to personally express our deepest gratitude for your extraordinarily generous donation. $10 million toward our new wing is a contribution this institution will never forget. I stood completely still beside the bed. $10 million, I thought. It is nothing, Minjae said, and the ease with which he said it was somehow more staggering than the number itself. Please, the director said warmly, if there is anything at all we can do to ensure your comfort during your recovery, you have only to say the word. Minjae glanced at me. The nurse, he said. I'd like her assigned to me as my personal nurse for the duration of my recovery. Director Choi turned to look at me with the pleasant expression of a man who had just been handed an easy problem to solve. "Of course," he said without hesitation. He was almost at the door when Minjae called him back with a single word. The director turned immediately. "Her salary," Minjae said. "Increase it." The director nodded like this was a routine item on an agenda. "Consider it done." I was standing in my own body watching all of this happen, and I genuinely could not find a framework for any of it. This man, this director who junior staff whispered about like a title, bowing his head, agreeing to everything, like it was nothing. Director Choi looked at me pleasantly before he left. "Check his vitals and wound dressing before you leave. And come see me in my office when you're done." He smiled at us both and walked out. The door closed. I moved to the monitoring equipment and began checking his vitals with the efficiency of someone who had decided to be professional about this, even if every other element of the situation was resisting professionalism completely. I checked the drip. I noted the readings. I kept my eyes on my work. I was about to leave when his hand closed gently around my wrist. He drew me back toward the bed, and when I turned, I found myself close enough that I had to tilt my chin up to meet his face. The button at the top of his hospital gown had come loose, and the gown had shifted, and what it revealed stopped my eyes before I could redirect them. His chest was the kind of physical presence that doesn't announce itself. It simply exists completely, marked here and there with old scars that told the history of a man who had been in the middle of danger many times before last night. And spreading from the center of his chest downward was the tattoo. Medusa, the goddess rendered in extraordinary detail, her serpentine hair coiling outward in perfect frozen motion, her expression carrying something I hadn't expected to see on a tattoo. Not rage, something that looked almost like sorrow. My hand moved before I gave it any instruction whatsoever. My fingers traced the edge of the tattoo, following the line of one serpent's coil slowly down across his chest, and the warmth of his skin beneath my fingertips was so immediately real that it snapped me back into myself, and I pulled my hand away and pressed it flat against my side as though it had acted entirely without my consent, which, to be completely accurate, it had. I looked up. He was watching me with a quiet, unreadable expression that made me feel like he had seen every single thought I'd just had. "Thank you," he said. His voice was quieter than I had heard it before. The edge that lived in it always was still there, but something beneath it was different. "For last night, you didn't have to help me, and you did. I won't forget that." I don't know how to fully explain what those words did to me. I had brought home the best results in my class for years and been told it was normal and to do better next time. I had worked at this hospital for 4 years and given everything I had to every patient who came through, and the acknowledgement had been so rare I had stopped expecting it. And here was this man, this impossible, dangerous man I had met on the floor of a dark church the night before, looking at me and saying simply and directly that he was grateful. I swallowed. He reached beside the bed and produced my scarf, cleaned and neatly folded, and my ID card, and placed them in my hand. I closed my fingers around them. "Nurse Amara," he said as I turned toward the door. I stopped, tilted my head slightly without fully turning. "I can't stop thinking about last night," he said, unhurried, like he was simply noting something true. I said nothing. I walked out, but in the corridor with the door closed behind me, I stood still for a moment and pressed my ID card and my scarf against my chest and allowed myself, privately, without letting it show on my face, to feel the full weight of what was happening inside me. I am not falling in love with a criminal, I told myself. I am not. He is dangerous and powerful and completely outside anything that belongs in my life, and I am a sensible, educated woman, and I am absolutely not doing this. I believed approximately half of that. I walked toward the director's office. Director Choi's office was on the top floor of the administrative wing, and it felt like entering a different world entirely. The floor was deep charcoal marble, so polished I could see my own reflection simply by looking down. The far wall was floor-to-ceiling glass, looking out over the entire city. His desk had a glass panel inset into the surface, and the keyboard glowed softly beneath it, responding to his fingertips like something out of a film. He looked up when I sat down. "So," he said, folding his hands together. "Mr. Kang, you know him?" "No," I said. The word came out steadily. Inside my chest, something clenched. Is that really the right answer? I thought immediately. But there was no version of the truth available to me that didn't involve a church and a gun and a kiss and a man bleeding on a dusty floor. And none of those things had a place in this office. "I haven't met him before," I said. The director looked at me for a moment with the mild assessing look of a man who has learned over a long career that people frequently say things that are adjacent to the truth. Then he moved on. "Your monthly salary has been adjusted from $4,000 to $15,000, effective immediately." I heard the number. Then I heard it again because the first time hadn't fully processed. $15,000 per month. I have been working at this hospital for 4 years with consistent performance reviews, placing me among the top nurses in my department. The honest trajectory of a career like mine suggested I might reach $10,000 a month somewhere around my 15th year of service if everything went well. I've been here 4 years. Mr. Kang's family are among the foundational sponsors of this institution, the director continued. Their contributions fund a significant portion of our operational costs. The relationship we maintain with them is of the highest importance. He looked at me directly. "He has requested you personally. I need you to understand the weight of that." "I understand," I said. "You'll attend to him at his private residence starting tomorrow. Keep him comfortable. Keep him happy. Make sure he continues to think of this hospital as a place that takes care of the people who take care of it. I'll still come in for my regular shifts," I said. He looked at me with mild surprise. "That's fine, but he is your priority. Non negociable." I nodded and left. That evening I arrived at Yuna's apartment, still carrying the day's quality of someone who has lived through too many impossible things in too short time for their mind to file any of them properly. Yuna was already home, sitting cross-legged on the sofa with ramen and a drama on the television. She looked up at my face from across the room and immediately reached for the remote. "Sit down," she said. "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her all of it. The church, the footsteps, the man, hiding behind the bench, the guards, the wound, treating him in the dark with my scarf and my alcohol, the bird, the guard returning, the kiss. At the word kiss, Yuna's bowl stopped halfway to her mouth and stayed there. I kept going, running out, calling him pathetic. The morning, the hospital, walking into room 12 and finding him there. My speech about the principal's tires. His response, the director walking in. The salary, $15,000 a month, I said. Yuna put the bowl down. "What did you say his name was again?" she said slowly. I told her. Her mouth opened. It didn't close. It stayed open long enough that a very specific and entirely new category of unease began building in my stomach. "Yuna," I said carefully, "why is your mouth doing that?" She closed it, then pressed both hands flat against her thighs like she needed to physically anchor herself. "Amara," she said very quietly, choosing each word the way you choose your footing on unstable ground. "Kang Minjae is not just a criminal." "Okay," I said. "He is the heir to the most powerful organized crime empire in this city. His father built it over 30 years. It controls more of Seoul's underground than most people even understand exists. Money, territory, protection networks, everything. When his father was alive, Minjae was already known as the most feared enforcer they had. Tactical, ruthless, the kind of person that even people who have been in this world their entire lives cross the street to avoid." She looked at me. "He's been away for some time, and the word is he's come back to take over completely. And the things that happen to people who get on the wrong side of him, Amara." "Stop," I said. I sat very still. Inside my mind, a rapid and deeply unpleasant inventory was taking place. Every single word I had said to him in that hospital room was playing back in high definition. "Pathetic. You should be dead. You funny human being." I burst my principal's tires. Every syllable arriving with the particular horror of words that cannot be retrieved. I told him he was pathetic. I said, "You what?" Eunice said. I called him a stalker. I said he was funny. I told him I wasn't scared of his gun. I paused. I told him about the eggs on the teacher's car. Eunice stared at me for a very long time. "And you are still alive," she said finally. "I'm still alive," I confirmed. We sat with that for a moment. "And he increased your salary," she said, "to $15,000 a month." Eunice picked up her bowl slowly, took one deliberate bite, stared at the pause screen, then looked at me with the careful precision of a best friend delivering something that needs to land correctly. "I don't know what is happening between you and Kang Minjae," she said, "but I know what it sounds like, and I need you to be very, very careful." I nodded, but lying in her spare room that night, staring at the ceiling, I found that being careful was a straightforward instruction to receive and a considerably more complicated one to follow when the person you were supposed to be careful about had looked at you in a hospital room and said simply, "I can't stop thinking about last night." I pressed my palm against my chest. "I'm not doing this," I told myself. I didn't entirely believe it. I thought I was prepared. I was not prepared. I stood at the entrance of the Kang estate the following morning and understood with quiet and complete clarity that I had never in my life been anywhere near wealth of this particular order. The gate alone was a statement. Black iron, sharp and elegant, the kind that says you are welcome and that this welcome is entirely conditional. When I gave my name at the intercom, it opened without comment. I walked through a stone courtyard where the gravel was the particular clean white of gravel that gets tended to by people whose entire job is tending to it. I was shown to a receiving room and asked to wait. I sat down. I looked around. The receiving room alone was larger than Yuna's entire apartment. The floor was pale marble with veins of gold running through it that caught the morning light and held it. Above me, a chandelier scattered that same light across the walls in fragments. Through the windows, I could see an open field where horses moved with the slow, regal ease of animals that had never experienced anything but exceptional care. And through the glass doors at the end of the corridor was the edge of a garage, holding a collection of cars that didn't exist for transportation so much as for the pure expression of what it looks like when money has run out of ordinary places to go. Yuna said this was a tiny bit of who he was, I thought. A tiny bit. I was led through to the private wing and shown to a door at the end of the corridor. The staff member knocked twice and stepped back. "Come in," came the voice from inside. I entered. Kang Minjae was not in bed. He was at the pull-up bar mounted in the frame of the inner doorway, working through a set with a focus and intensity that made it clear that for him, a gunshot wound to the abdomen was an inconvenience to be managed rather than a reason to rest. He completed his set and dropped to the floor, and I saw it immediately. The dressing at his side had given way. Fresh blood was tracing a line down his skin. I was in front of him before I had consciously decided to move, dropping to one knee and pressing a clean cloth against the wound with firm, controlled pressure. "Sit down, please," I said in the tone I used when I needed a patient to cooperate and wasn't looking for a discussion. He looked at me for a moment. Then he sat. I worked carefully, removing the compromised dressing, cleaning the wound surface, checking the edges, applying a fresh bandage with the focused efficiency I brought to every clinical task. I kept my eyes on the wound and did not raise them. I didn't notice him noticing me. I was aware of the quiet in the room. I was aware of his stillness, the quality of it, the stillness of someone paying close attention. But I was focused on the task, and the task required me not to look up, which I didn't, right up until the moment I became aware that the attention in the room had a direction to it, and that direction was me. I had been staring, not intentionally, not in any way I had authorized, but somewhere between the third and fourth pass across his chest my eyes had stopped being clinical and started being something else entirely, and I had not noticed until he did. He took my hand gently and placed it flat against his chest. The warmth was immediate, and I pulled my hand back fast, nearly dropping the dressing material. I pressed my lips together and looked down at my hands. "I'm sorry," I said, keeping my voice level, "for what I said to you at the hospital. I didn't know who you were, and I looked up. His eyes were on mine. The words dissolved somewhere between my mind and my mouth, because I was looking directly at him now, and the look he was giving me back was patient and quiet and waiting, and I could feel the space where the rest of my sentence was supposed to go filling up with something I hadn't prepared for. Criminal, my mind offered helpfully. That's the word. Criminal. Or dangerous. Or the man who could end your life without inconveniencing his afternoon. The word you're looking for, he said quietly, is criminal. Isn't it? No, I said, shaking my head faster than was convincing. That is not what I was going to say. Then what were you going to say? I looked at him. He looked back. I was going to say, I said carefully, that I apologized for my tone at the hospital. It wasn't appropriate. The corner of his mouth moved. We don't accept apologies in my world, he said, with just enough lightness in his voice to take the edge off without removing the meaning. You have to pay for them. He stood and walked to the drinks cabinet, poured something amber into a heavy glass. Then without turning around, he said, Come back tomorrow. The schedule is 3 visits per week, I said. So the next visit wouldn't be until... He looked back at me over his shoulder. I closed my mouth. Tomorrow, he said again. No problem, I said. I came back the following day. He wasn't in the room when I arrived, so I stood in the sitting room of his private wing and looked around properly for the first time. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out onto the grounds. Furniture that was sparse and deliberate in the way that very expensive things are, nothing unnecessary, everything exactly where it belonged. Along the inner wall was a series of formal portraits tracing what was clearly a family that understood itself as a dynasty. I walked slowly along them, and then my attention landed on a sideboard against the adjacent wall where, among several carefully arranged objects, a tall ceramic vase stood with the particular presence of something very old and very valuable. I reached out to touch it. I don't know why exactly. The texture of the glaze, the depth of the color. My hand moved before my better judgment could say anything about it. My fingertips brushed the surface. Then my hand shifted. The vase tipped. I grabbed for it with both hands and caught it, but in redirecting its fall, I knocked the rim against the edge of the sideboard and a small, but very clear chip appeared on the upper edge. I stared at the chip. The chip stared back at me, and with the speed of someone making a decision they know is not their finest, I picked up the vase, crouched down, tucked it carefully behind the lower shelf of the sideboard with the chipped side facing inward, stood back up, straightened my uniform, and looked at the room with the expression of a person who had been doing absolutely nothing of any consequence. Then I heard footsteps. Kang Minjae came through the entrance, and I turned to face him with that same expression, fully deployed. He crossed the room at an unhurried pace, stopped at the sideboard, looked at the objects on its surface, noted the absence of the vase with the calm recognition of a man who already knew exactly where it was going to be, reached down and retrieved it, turned it in his hands, found the chip immediately. Then he looked at me. It seems, he said, that we've started getting touchy in here. My stomach performed a maneuver I would prefer not to describe. He set the vase down and walked toward me slowly, one step at a time, until he was close enough that I would have had to step back to create more space between us. I did not step back. Your punishment, he said, dropping his voice, is getting worse. He bent forward slowly toward my face, and I watched him come the entire way down with the helpless attention of someone watching a situation develop that they have theoretically decided not to engage with. My eyes closed. His mouth changed direction at the last possible second and arrived at my ear instead, warm and quiet. I'm hungry, he said. Make me something to eat. My eyes opened. I straightened up, turned around, and walked out of the room with the pace of someone covering ground purposefully. In the corridor, I stopped the guard and asked very calmly for the direction to the kitchen. Then I went and I cooked. I moved through his kitchen the way I always move when I cook alone, with earbuds in and a rhythm that matches the music, reaching for things, adjusting the heat, tasting and seasoning fully inside the particular piece that cooking has always given me. I didn't hear him come in. I stepped back from the stove to reach for something behind me, and my heel came down directly on his foot. He made a short, contained sound of pain. We both reached for his foot at the same moment, arrived at the same height at the same time, and found our faces very close together. I looked up from his foot to his face and found him already looking at me, and the look lasted long enough to have shape to it. "Sorry," I said. "I had my earbuds in." "I noticed," he said. I straightened up and found myself between him and the counter, his hands resting on the edge on either side of me. Not trapping me, just there, present. The distance between us was small enough that I was very aware of every breath, and his face began moving toward mine, and my face did not retreat, and the kitchen was very quiet, and the bodyguard walked in. He stopped in the doorway, registered the scene, and his face moved through several rapid expressions before landing on professional neutrality. "Sir." "Sorry, sir." Minjae turned without urgency. "Wait," he said. He followed the guard out. In the corridor, I could hear their voices without the words. The bodyguard's tone carrying the quality of information that is both urgent and unwelcome. I turned back to the stove. I focused on the food. When a meal was ready, I brought it through to the dining room. He sat down and looked at the plate, and then looked at me with an expression that was direct and simple. "Sit," he said. "I'm not hungry," I said. He picked up a spoon, took a portion, and held it out to me. I looked at the spoon. I looked at him. I took the bite. A guard brought a second set of cutlery without being asked. Minjae drew the plate to the center of the table and indicated the chair beside him. I sat down, and we ate together in a silence that was not uncomfortable, which was itself something I noticed without meaning to. It was the easy silence of two people who had somehow, across the span of impossible circumstances, moved past the need to fill the space between them with noise. I reached for my water. I drank two quickly. The water went where it wasn't supposed to, and the front of my dress bore the consequence. I pressed my lips together. "Bathroom," I managed. He pointed left. I went right. I only realized my mistake when I pushed the door open and found not a guest bathroom, but his bedroom. Wide and high-ceilinged, with a bed positioned to face floor, to ceiling windows, and a wardrobe along the left wall that was partially open, I could see the same careful order that existed in every other surface of this house. I grabbed a towel from the wardrobe and found the bathroom. The bathtub was deep and wide, and the water pressure when I turned it on was the kind that costs money. I climbed in and let the water wash the day's accumulation of tension and confusion off my skin, and for 15 minutes, I was just myself in warm water and quiet, and I had needed that more than I had realized. I climbed out. I reached for the towel. I walked out of the bathroom, and Kang Minjae was standing in the middle of his bedroom. We both stopped. The seconds that followed did something unusual with time, slowing it down without fully stopping it. I was standing in the doorway of his bathroom in a towel. He was standing in his room with the expression of a man who had walked in expecting to find it empty and had found instead something that his composure, formidable as it was in the process of managing. His eyes met mine, and what passed between us in that silence was not embarrassment. It was something larger and quieter than that, something that neither of us named, because naming it would have required one of us to move first, and neither of us moved for long enough that the moment became something with a before and an after. I found my voice first. I went the wrong way. "I'm sorry. It's fine," he said. His voice was different. The controlled authority that colored everything he said was still there, but something had shifted beneath it, something I hadn't heard before. He turned around, giving me his back, his hands finding the balcony door. "Take your time," he said. He went outside. I moved quickly, found a shirt in the wardrobe, changed, straightened myself, and tried to locate the version of me that was professional and sensible and fully in command of her own responses. I found something approximately resembling her and walked out to the balcony. "I'm done, and I'm sorry about the room." He turned from the railing. He looked at me, and I saw something in his face I had not seen there before. Not in the church, not in the hospital, not in any moment before this one. The guard wasn't down exactly. Men like him don't fully lower their guard. But something had shifted in his expression, something that had been held very carefully in place. And in its shifting, I saw something that looked startlingly like what I felt when I looked at him. "You'll stay tonight," he said. Not a question. Not exactly a command either. Something in between, in the space where a man who has never needed to ask for anything discovers there is one thing he wants to ask for. I looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," I said. He passed by me gently on the way back inside, close enough that I felt the warmth of him, and went to his room. I stood on the balcony for a while after he had gone, looking out at the grounds in the evening light, and I let myself acknowledge quietly and privately, and without trying to argue myself out of it, that I was not the same person I had been when I walked into this house that morning. Something had shifted. I suspected it had been shifting since a cold floor in an abandoned church in the dark, with my heart beating against my parents' photographs and his mouth warm against mine. I didn't sleep for a long time that night. I woke before him. I showered and dressed and went to the kitchen. I put my earbuds in and I cooked. A proper breakfast, eggs and rice and broth and fruit cut and arranged without fuss, moving through the kitchen in the comfortable rhythm that cooking always gave me, swaying slightly to the music fully inside my own world. I didn't hear him come in. I stepped back from the stove, and my heel came down on his foot. Again, we both reached for it at the same time, arrived at the same height, found our faces close, and both of us started to speak at once and stopped. And I looked at him, and he looked at me, and then we were both, quietly and without planning it, almost smiling. "Your foot," I said. "My foot," he confirmed. "I'm sorry. I genuinely can't hear anything with these in." I held up the earbud. "I've noticed," he said, in exactly the same tone he had used the evening before, and something about the repetition of it produced a warmth in my chest that I decided not to examine. I turned back to the stove. He didn't move away from the counter. His hands were still resting on the edge on either side of me, and I was still between him and the stove, and the kitchen was quiet, and the distance between us was small, and his chin came to rest near the top of my head with a naturalness that neither of us remarked on. I continued cooking, and he stood there, and the morning light came through the window and sat across both of us, and there was a peace to it that I had not felt in longer than I could clearly remember. I fed him as I cooked. Spoonfuls offered over my shoulder without turning around, things to taste, small portions from the pot, and he took each one quietly and without comment. We ate breakfast at the kitchen counter side by side, not the formal dining room, not with ceremony. Just two people in a kitchen in the morning light. It was the most ordinary thing that had happened to either of us in a very long time, and we both knew it without saying it. When I stood at the sink after we finished, he came up behind me and wrapped one arm around my waist, gentle and unhurried, and I let my hands rest over his and looked out the window at the grounds coming alive in the morning and said nothing. Nothing was needed. This is the part of the story I didn't see. This is what happened while I was in the mansion that afternoon with a book from the library, waiting without fully admitting to myself that I was waiting. Later that day, Minjae took a call in his private office with the door closed. His second in command delivered the intelligence that had come through. His uncle's location confirmed. A planned attack on the estate within the week. The window to move first was narrow and closing fast. Minjae sat at his desk after the guard finished and was quiet for a long time. His uncle had funded the gang that destabilized his father's empire. His uncle had manipulated the chaos to position himself at the center of power. His uncle had arranged his father's death and then called him with grief in his voice and sat in an abandoned church pretending to mourn alongside him. And when Minjae had come back too strong and too strategic to be managed, his uncle had tried to have him killed in the very church where they met. He called his men together. That night, they moved on his uncle's location in a formation that gave away nothing until it was already too late to respond to. The engagement was brief and brutal. Minjae moved through it with the focused lethality of a man who had been waiting a long time for this specific moment. But in the final exchange, a bullet found him, front left abdomen below the ribs. It spun him sideways and dropped him to one knee in the dark. He registered the pain the way he always registered pain, as information to be processed and not surrendered to. He stayed on his feet. He kept moving. His uncle was hit twice, once in the leg and once through the hand, and went down. But in the chaos and the scrambling of his remaining men, he escaped. Wounded and depleted, but alive. Gone into the dark before Minjae's men could reach him. Minjae gave his instructions through the blood and the controlled breathing, called for increased security at the estate, accounted for every man. Then he let his second help him into the car. They drove home. I had been sitting in the large living room for 2 hours. I couldn't read. I couldn't sleep. Every part of me was pointed at the front door and the person I needed to walk through it. I hadn't known exactly where he had gone or what he had gone into, but I had felt the shift in the house that afternoon. The guards moving differently, conversations stopping when I passed, Minjae's face carrying the look of a man who had stopped waiting and started deciding. I hadn't asked. I had understood that this world had its own rules, and my asking wouldn't change what was already in motion. But knowing something is going to happen and sitting alone in a quiet house while it does are two very different kinds of knowing. Then I heard the gates. I was already moving toward the entrance when the main door opened. He was being supported by his second in command, his arm over the man's shoulder, his face carrying the contained, expressionless quality of someone exerting significant effort to look like they weren't in the amount of pain they were in. His shirt was dark on the left side in the way I already knew too well. I moved to him without a word. I took his other side, put my arm around him, and felt him register the contact immediately. Felt something in his body respond to it, a subtle shift from pure maintenance to something that allowed itself, just fractionally, to lean. "I've got him," I said to the guard. The guard looked at Minjae. Minjae gave a small nod. I walked him to his bedroom. I sat him on the edge of the bed and began removing his shirt with quiet efficiency and felt his eyes on me the entire time. He was watching my face, not assessing, not calculating, just watching with the full and simple concentration of a man looking at something that matters to him. I cleaned the wound. I closed what needed closing. I dressed it carefully with the materials I kept in my bag. I checked the first wound on his right side, already healing well, and made sure the night hadn't disturbed it. I worked, and as I worked, I felt the thing I had been managing carefully all week begin to move through me with a force that quietness could no longer contain. The fear of something happening to him, the relief of him being here, the intimacy of my hands on his skin for the fourth time now, always in the context of keeping him alive, always with this tenderness that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with what I had been telling myself for days I wasn't feeling. I had been lying to myself. I knew that now. I secured the last bandage. He reached up. His fingers found my chin gently and tilted my face up to his, and I didn't resist. I was done resisting. I had spent a week resisting, and the only thing it had accomplished was making me understand with increasing clarity exactly what I was resisting and why I couldn't stop. I looked at him. He looked at me. And everything that had been building between us across every impossible moment, every near miss, every charged silence, every almost and almost and almost arrived all at once. He kissed me, and this was nothing like the church. The church had been urgent and silent and born of necessity, and it had lasted seconds. This was unhurried. This was the kind of kiss that knows it has time and uses every bit of it. That says everything two people have not been saying out loud across a week that felt like a different kind of forever. His hand cradled my face the way I would never forget, and I kissed him back with the full weight of everything I'd been carrying and had not had anywhere to put until this moment. When we finally pulled apart, I rested my forehead against his, and we breathed the same air in the quiet. I helped him lie back against the pillows slowly and carefully, one hand support his back, the other holding his arm, the way I had learned to move patients without causing them unnecessary pain. But this didn't feel like moving a patient. It felt like something else entirely, and I was very aware of that as I pulled the covers up and straightened them and tried to locate the professional version of myself somewhere in the room. She was nowhere to be found. I stepped back from the bed and picked up my things from the bedside table, and he watched me do it with the quiet attention he gave everything, and then he reached out and took my hand. Not urgently. Not with the controlled grip he had used in the church when everything was danger and noise. Just gently, his fingers closing around mine with a simplicity that somehow said more than urgency ever could. "Stay with me," he said. I looked at him. His face in the low light of the room was different from every version of it I had seen before. The edge that lived there always, the particular authority that colored every expression, was still present, but underneath it something else was showing through. Something quieter. Something that this man did not show the world and possibly had not shown anyone in a very long time. Something that looked, if I was being honest with myself, like the specific vulnerability of a person who is not used to wanting something they cannot simply take. He was asking. I set my things back down. I walked around to the other side of the bed, and I lay down beside him, on top of the covers, still in my clothes, and for a moment we both just lay there in the silence looking up at the ceiling, and I was so aware of every inch of space between us that it almost felt loud. Then he turned slightly, carefully, mindful of his wound, and his arm came around me and drew me gently against his side, my head coming to rest on his chest just below his shoulder, his hand settling warm and heavy against my arm. I lay still. I could feel his heartbeat beneath my cheek, steady and strong and slightly faster than rest, which meant he was as aware of this moment as I was, which meant everything he was projecting outwardly of calm and control was exactly that. A projection. Underneath it, he was here, present, feeling this. That knowledge did something to me that I couldn't fully describe. I closed my eyes. The room was quiet around us. The kind of quiet that a large house settles into late at night, when everyone else is gone, and it is just two people and the sound of each other breathing. Outside somewhere a light wind was moving through the grounds, and I could hear it faintly through the window, and the horses were still, and Seoul beyond the estate walls was doing whatever Seoul does at this hour, but none of it touched us in here. "Amara," he said. His voice was low, almost a murmur. I said. He said nothing else. Just my name. Like he had wanted to say it in this particular quiet, in this particular closeness, and now that he had, there was nothing else that needed to follow it. I smiled against his chest where he couldn't see it. I am lying in bed with Kang Minjae, I thought, and the thought arrived with the particular quality of things that are both completely real and somehow still impossible to fully believe. I am lying in bed with the most dangerous man in Seoul, and my heart feels safer than it has in years. What is happening to my life? I felt him exhale slowly, deeply, the long exhale of a body finally releasing something it had been holding for a long time. His hand moved slightly against my arm, just a small adjustment, pulling me fractionally closer. And then his breathing changed, slowed and deepened, and even out into the rhythm of real sleep, true sleep, the kind that doesn't perform rest, but simply is it. And I lay against his chest and listened to it and felt the exact moment his body stopped managing itself and just let go. I stayed awake a little longer, not because I wasn't tired. I was exhausted in every possible way a person can be exhausted, but because there was something about lying there in the dark listening to him sleep that I wanted to stay inside for just a little longer before I let it go. The sleep that found us both that night was the deepest either of us had had in years. I woke up, and he was already gone from the bed. I found him on the balcony. He was standing at the railing with his hands loose at his sides, looking out at the grounds in the early morning, the sun still new and gentle, the horses moving slowly in the far field. He looked like a man trying to locate himself within something that had shifted. His second joined him a few minutes after I appeared at the balcony door, and I stepped back inside to give them their space, but I caught fragments. The uncle had escaped, wounded and diminished, but still alive. Security at the estate was being increased. When the guard had gone, I came back out with 2 cups of tea and stood beside him at the railing. "How's the pain?" I asked. "Manageable," he said. I studied him the way I studied all my patients, clinically and carefully, and then I studied him the way I had stopped pretending I didn't, which was a different kind of looking entirely. "Breakfast," I said. I went inside, and from the balcony, Alone for a moment in the early morning with no one watching, Kang Minjae smiled. A real one, unguarded and complete. The kind that belonged to no one but the morning air and whatever had been quietly growing between him and a Nigerian nurse who had found him bleeding on the floor of an abandoned church and decided, without knowing anything about who he was or what it might cost her, that he was worth saving. He went inside. She was already in the kitchen. A week passed. It was not an uncomplicated week. The security around the estate was heightened, and Minjae moved through his days managing an unfinished war while something quieter was happening between us inside the walls of the house. A rhythm had developed that neither of us had planned. I came in the mornings. I treated as wound. I cooked sometimes. I read in the library in the afternoons. I went to the hospital for my shifts. I came back in the evenings. He noticed every time I came back. I knew because I noticed him noticing, and I had stopped pretending otherwise. On the 8th day, I needed to go to the hospital to collect a new batch of medication for his dressing changes. I moved through the familiar corridors easily, collected what I needed from the pharmacy, exchanged a few words with colleagues at the nurse's station, and made my way back out to the car. It was a gray morning, the sky the flat pale color of Seoul in early spring. The car park was quiet. I clicked the car open, pulled the door, set my bag on the passenger seat, and started to sit down. Then darkness. Something came down over my head from behind, heavy and black and total, cutting off every reference point instantly. Hands, more than one pair, moved with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before, and before I could process what was happening well enough to fight back, I was pulled backward. My hands were caught and controlled. A door closed around me, and beneath me was the unmistakable sensation of vehicle seat, and then the sound of an engine and movement, and the world rushing past outside at a speed that told me we were already on a main road. My bag was gone. My phone was gone. The car drove through Seoul streets, and I sat in the darkness and breathed and did not make a sound. I focused every available part of me on staying present, staying aware, tracking every turn, every sound, every detail the darkness would allow. I told myself. My own voice in my head was steady. Pay attention. Remember everything. Think, because I was still alive. And as long as I was still alive, there was still something I could do. The car drove on.